Autumn nights carry more than just a chill in the air. When the leaves fall and the moon hangs heavy, the shadows grow teeth, and the stories become real. Tonight, I'm going to share with you 5 terrifying true autumn night horror stories. Tales of watchers in the cornfields, figures on lonely highways, and creatures that crawl out only when the harvest moon rises. These are not just stories to pass the time. These are warnings. And once you hear them, you'll never look at an autumn night the same way again. It was the last week of October in a small rural town in Illinois, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and the nights seemed to stretch on forever. Autumn had settled fully across the land. Trees stood bare, their leaves carpeting the ground in shades of orange and brown, and the air carried the scent of damp earth and burning wood from fireplaces across the countryside. But more than anything, the season meant the harvest. Cornfields dominated the landscape, their tall golden stalks rustling like whispers in the dark. Jacob, a 19-year-old college freshman, had taken a seasonal job helping a local farmer, Mr. Hallbrook, finish his harvest before winter hit. The work was tough, long hours spent hauling and cutting, but it paid well enough. Besides, Jacob had grown up in this town, and autumn had always been his favorite time of year. He liked the quiet, the stillness of the fields at dusk. That was, until the night he decided to take a shortcut home. It was close to 10 p.m. when Jacob finally wrapped up. The others had already left, and his car was parked half a mile down the road. Instead of walking along the highway, he chose the shorter path, a narrow dirt trail cutting through the heart of the cornfield. He'd walked it dozens of times during the day, but never at night. With his phone flashlight in hand, he stepped into the rows of towering stalks, the darkness swallowing him whole. The sound was immediate. Dry husks brushed against his jacket, leaves crackled underfoot, and the wind hissed low through the stalks, creating the eerie illusion of whispers. Jacob tried to calm himself, telling himself it was nothing unusual. But then he realized something. He wasn't just hearing the corn, he was hearing footsteps. At first, he thought it was his own echo. But no, these were separate. Off to his right, maybe 10 or 20 feet in, something was moving with him. Every time he slowed, the steps slowed. Every time he quickened his pace, so did they. His throat went dry. He stopped completely, holding his breath, and in that silence he heard it clearly, the crunch of weight pressing into the soil. "Hello?" he called out nervously, his flashlight trembling in his grip. "Is someone there?" For a long moment, nothing answered. Then, between the rows, he noticed it. A figure. It stood unnaturally still, just barely visible beyond the stalks. At first, Jacob thought it might just be a scarecrow the farmer had left behind. But something about the way it stood was wrong. Scarecrows were limp, stuffed with straw, with clothes blowing gently in the wind. This figure was rigid, upright, watching. He lifted the beam of his phone toward it, and his stomach dropped. It wasn't a scarecrow. It was a person, taller than average, its head covered by a burlap sack with 2 crude holes for eyes. The sack sagged against its skull, giving it a grotesque and human shape. In its hand, glinting faintly under the light, was a rusted sickle. Jacob froze. His mind scrambled for explanations. Maybe it was a prank, some teenager messing around before Halloween. Maybe it was one of the farmer's friends pulling a joke. But then the figure moved. Slowly at first, stepping into the path ahead of him, blocking his way. The corn whispered violently in the wind, almost as if the entire field was holding its breath. "Look, I don't want any trouble," Jacob stammered. He took a cautious step back. The figure tilted its head unnaturally to the side, like a predator considering its prey. Then, without warning, it broke into a sprint. Jacob bolted, crashing through the stalks, his phone nearly slipping from his sweaty hand. The dry leaves slashed his face, the ground uneven beneath his boots. Behind him, he could hear it, the pounding of footsteps, the sound of the sickle cutting through the corn as it slashed its way forward. His chest burned as he pushed himself harder, adrenaline surging through every muscle. He burst from the rows and spotted the wooden fence that bordered the road. With a desperate leap, he cleared it, tumbling onto the gravel shoulder, his knees scraping raw. He spun around, gasping, flashlight beam darting wildly across the cornfield. Nothing, just the endless sway of stalks in the moonlight, whispering softly, as if mocking him. For a few moments, Jacob lay there, convinced he was losing his mind. Maybe the exhaustion had played tricks on him. Maybe he had imagined it. But when he finally stood, brushing dirt from his jacket, he saw something that froze him in place. Deep footprints in the mud, leading out of the corn. They were bigger than his own, heavier, pressed deep into the earth, and lying beside them, half buried in the soil, was the burlap mask. Its eye holes stared up at him, empty and lifeless. Jacob ran the rest of the way to his car and didn't stop until he was locked inside, engine roaring, tire spitting gravel as he sped down the road. He didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. The image of that faceless figure stayed with him. The sound of it crashing through the corn burned into his memory. The next morning, he told Mr. Holbrook. The old farmer went pale, his weathered face tightening as he listened. "There hasn't been a scarecrow in that field for years," he said quietly. "Not since." His voice trailed off. When Jacob pressed him, he shook his head. "Best stay out of that field at night, son. Best not to stir up things that don't belong to us." Later that week, Jacob learned something chilling. 20 years ago, another farmhand had gone missing in those very fields. They found his truck still parked by the road, but he was never seen again. All they discovered was a torn burlap sack caught in the corn. The police called it a disappearance. The locals called it something else. They called him the Cornfield Watcher, and they said that once autumn came, he always returned to the fields to hunt. It was late October when Daniel found himself driving home on the kind of road people only use when they have no other choice. A two-lane highway cutting through endless stretches of forest in upstate New York. It was close to midnight, and the air outside had dropped into the low 40s. The trees stood like blackened walls on either side of him, their bare branches stretching overhead like claws. The road seemed endless, and his only company was the low hum of the tires and the occasional flicker of his headlights against a reflective road sign. Daniel had always disliked this route. Locals often whispered about the lonely highway, telling stories of hitchhikers who weren't really there, of strange figures walking just inside the tree line. But tonight he didn't have a choice. His GPS had rerouted him this way after an accident closed down the main interstate. He told himself it was nothing, just an empty road, just a dark night. But the silence pressed against him, and every mile he drove felt heavier. The first thing that put him on edge was the radio. Static had swallowed the music hours earlier, but as he tried to turn the dial, he caught fragments of something, murmured voices, low and distorted. It was impossible to make out the words, but it didn't sound like any broadcast had ever heard. He shut it off, muttering to himself that it was probably just interference from the trees. But he couldn't shake the feeling that the voices hadn't been random. It was as if someone had been whispering directly into the car. He drove for another half hour before the headlights caught something ahead on the shoulder of the road. At first, he thought it was a deer, but as he got closer, the shape grew clearer. It was a person, a woman, standing very still, facing away from the road. She wore a pale dress that seemed too thin for the cold night. Daniel slowed down instinctively, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. The woman didn't move, didn't turn, didn't acknowledge the car at all. Against every instinct screaming at him, he rolled down the passenger side window just a crack. "Hey, are you okay? Do you need help?" His voice sounded foreign in the vast silence. Nothing. She stood frozen, her head tilted slightly down, as if staring at the ground. Daniel hesitated. Should he stop? Call the police? He leaned out a little more. That was when the woman's head turned, not fully, just enough for him to see her face reflected in the glow of the headlights. Her eyes were completely black. No pupils, no whites, just voids. Daniel's heart lurched. He slammed his foot on the gas and tore down the road. His rearview mirror shook, but when he forced himself to look, she was gone, vanished. The shoulder of the road was empty, as if no one had ever been there. He drove faster now, adrenaline clawing through his veins, but the forest seemed darker, closer. Every shadow at the edge of the road felt alive, leaning in to watch him pass. He kept telling himself had imagined it. Maybe exhaustion. Maybe his brain playing tricks. But a few miles later, something else appeared. Far ahead, in the twin beams of his headlights, he saw it again. The same woman, standing in the middle of the road this time, facing him directly. The pale dress rippled as if in a breeze he couldn't feel. Her arms hung limply at her sides, her black eyes locked on him. Daniel's stomach dropped. He jerked the wheel and swerved into the opposite lane, flying past her at 70 miles per hour. For a split second, as he passed, he swore he saw her mouth open, too wide, stretching unnaturally, like a black cavern screaming silently into the night. His skin crawled. He couldn't breathe. And when he glanced into the rearview mirror, she wasn't standing in the road anymore. She was closer, on the shoulder, watching him speed away. By now, Daniel was panicking. His knuckles were white on the wheel, his chest heaving as if he'd run miles. He couldn't think straight. He pressed harder on the gas, praying for an exit, a town, any sign of civilization. But the highway stretched on endlessly. No lights, no cars, no sign of life. Just him, the trees, and that thing that looked like a woman. Minutes dragged into what felt like hours. He told himself he had to keep going. That stopping would be worse. But the car began to shake. The engine sputtered. His heart sank as he realized the fuel gauge was dipping lower than it should have been. Had filled up earlier that day. There was no way he was this close to empty. But the needle kept dropping, faster than was possible, as though something was draining the life out of the vehicle. Finally, the car coughed, lurched, and died. The headlights flickered and went black. The silence of the forest rushed in, suffocating. Daniel sat frozen, his breath fogging the windshield. For a long moment, he couldn't move. Then he heard it, a soft sound, like footsteps on gravel. Slow, deliberate, getting closer. He forced himself to turn his head toward the side mirror. At first, he saw nothing, just the faint outline of the trees. Then movement, a figure emerging from the darkness. The woman. She was walking down the shoulder toward him, her white dress glowing faintly in the starlight, her head tilted at that unnatural angle, her black eyes unblinking. Daniel fumbled with his phone, hands shaking, trying to dial 911. But the screen stayed dark, unresponsive, as though drained of power. The footsteps grew louder, closer. He could hear the crunch of gravel, then the faint scrape of fingernails along the driver's side door. His lungs felt locked. His every instinct screamed at him to run, but he couldn't move. Slowly, unbearably slowly, her face appeared in the driver's side window. Those void black eyes stared in, inches from his own. And then, her mouth opened again, stretching wider and wider until it looked like her jaw might snap. Daniel screamed. That was the last thing he remembered. The next morning, a trucker spotted his car on the side of the highway. Empty. No sign of Daniel. His phone was on the passenger seat, screen shattered. The police report noted that the fuel tank was still nearly full. But what disturbed them most was the message carved deep into the driver's side door, etched in jagged, uneven letters. Stay off this road. On a quiet October evening, Rachel and her younger brother, Evan, decided to take the long walk back from a friend's Halloween gathering. The party had been fun, filled with candy, laughter, and spooky decorations. But by the time they left, the small town streets were empty, the air crisp with the bite of late autumn, and the moon hung low and swollen, casting a pale light over the fields that surrounded their neighborhood. Their walk took them past rows of old farmhouses and open land dotted with patches of pumpkins, left unharvested after the season's festival. Rachel pulled her jacket tighter, her breath visible in the night air. Evan kicked at fallen leaves along the roadside, humming nervously to himself. Had heard the stories, the local legend about the jack-o'-lantern man. Rachel rolled her eyes whenever the topic came up, dismissing it as just another campfire tale. But tonight, something about the stillness of the road, the heavy silence between the trees, made even her uneasy. The legend went like this. Every autumn, when the leaves turned and the pumpkins glowed in front of porches, a figure would appear in town. He wasn't entirely human, though he wore a man's body. His head was a hollowed pumpkin, carved with a jagged smile and flickering eyes that burned like fire, had wait for children walking home too late, luring them with laughter, then chasing them into the fields. Some said he was a spirit of harvest, demanding a toll of life for the bounty of crops. Others whispered he was a cursed farmer, punished for making a deal he couldn't repay. But everyone agreed on one thing. If you ever saw a pumpkin glowing in the middle of the road where there hadn't been one before, you turned around and went home. Rachel didn't believe it. Not really. But as they reached the narrow dirt path that cut between two cornfields, she noticed something strange. Up ahead, right in the center of the path, was a pumpkin. Large, round, and perfectly carved with a jagged grin. A faint orange light flickered inside it. Evan froze. "Rachel, we didn't see that on the way here." Rachel frowned. She tried to sound calm. "Probably some kids from the party. They're just messing around." But even as she said it, her voice felt thin. Who would leave a lit jack-o'-lantern out here, in the middle of nowhere? They walked around it cautiously. As they passed, Evan swore he heard something. A low chuckle, raspy and hollow, carried on the breeze. He grabbed Rachel's arm. "You heard that, right?" Rachel shook her head quickly. "It's just the wind." But her pace quickened. They'd barely gone 100 feet when Evan stopped again. His face drained of color. "Rachel, look." Another pumpkin sat on the path ahead. Identical to the first, same jagged grin, same flickering light. This time, Rachel's breath caught in her throat. She turned back, half expecting the first pumpkin to still be behind them. It was gone. The dirt road was empty. Her stomach dropped. "Okay, we're cutting across." She pulled Evan into the cornfield. The dry stalks rustled as they pushed through, the path uneven and dark. The rows seemed endless, stretching on in every direction. Rachel's flashlight barely pierced the tall walls of corn. Every step they took seemed to echo, magnified by the silence around them. Then came the laughter, faint at first, like a man chuckling far away. Then closer, deeper. It rose and fell like the rustling of the stalks, circling them. Evan clung to Rachel's arm, trembling. "He's real. He's real." Rachel wanted to tell him to shut up, to stop feeding his fear, but she couldn't. The sound was too clear, too deliberate. They stumbled out of the corn onto another dirt path, their breaths ragged, and there in front of them stood a man, or something like one. He was tall, his shoulders broad beneath a tattered coat. His hands were long, fingers gnarled like roots, and atop his body was the head of a pumpkin, carved with a jagged grin, eyes glowing with a fire that wasn't natural. The jack-o'-lantern man. He tilted his head slowly as if studying them, the grin unmoving but alive with malice. Then he lifted one long, claw-like hand and pointed at them. Rachel grabbed Evan's hand. "Run!" They tore down the path, the sound of pounding footsteps behind them. Heavy, unnatural. Each thud shook the ground like something larger than a man. The cornfield seemed to close in, twisting paths that shouldn't have been there. Rachel's lungs burned, but she couldn't stop. Evan stumbled, crying out, but she yanked him back to his feet. The laughter followed them, louder now, closer. It wasn't just in front of them or behind them. It was everywhere, echoing from the corn, from the ground, from inside their own skulls. Rachel risked a glance back. He was there, only a few yards behind, his pumpkin head burning brighter, the carved smile stretching wider as if it were alive. Then, suddenly, the path opened into a clearing. Dozens of pumpkins littered the ground, each one glowing, each one carved with the same jagged grin. The light was blinding, disorienting. Rachel staggered, shielding her eyes. Evan screamed. The pumpkins weren't just decorations, they were faces. Every grin was slightly different, twisted, mocking. And in the center of them all stood the jack-o'-lantern man, waiting. Rachel knew then they weren't going to escape. Not both of them. She shoved Evan toward the far side of the clearing. "Go. Don't stop, don't look back." Her voice cracked, but she forced strength into it. Evan hesitated, tears streaming down his face, but then he ran. The last thing Rachel saw was the jack-o'-lantern man turning toward her, his glowing eyes locking onto hers. The fire inside his head roared. and the grin widened until it split the pumpkin in half. The clearing went dark. The next morning, search parties found Evan wandering the edge of the cornfield, shivering, unable to speak. Rachel was never found, but in the clearing, they discovered something else. A single pumpkin, carved with a new face. Its grin jagged, its eyes wide with terror. And inside, glowing faintly, was Rachel's scream. Sam had driven past it countless times on his way home from work, always at a distance, always fast enough that he never really looked. But he knew it was there, the house at the edge of the woods. It stood alone, set back from the road, its windows dark and lifeless. The roof sagged in places, shingles missing, the paint long since peeled to gray wood. People in town said no one had lived there for decades. Others claimed someone still did, though no one had ever seen a light on inside. It was the kind of house kids dared each other to approach on Halloween. But even then, they never went farther than the front steps. One cold October evening, Sam found himself drawn to it. He couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the way the moonlight fell across the sagging porch, or maybe it was the gnawing boredom of his predictable life. He had heard enough stories about the house, how people claimed to see faces in the windows, how voices whispered if you got too close. He never believed any of it. But that night, instead of driving past, he parked his car along the shoulder and stepped out. The woods pressed close around him, dark and watchful. The air smelled of damp leaves and earth. Gravel crunched under his shoes as he crossed the short stretch of yard. Every step felt heavier, his chest tighter, though he told himself it was just nerves. The front door was ajar. That unsettled him more than anything else. If the place was truly abandoned, why wasn't it locked? The wood was warped, the hinges rusted, but the door hung open like an invitation. Sam hesitated at the threshold, shining his phone's flashlight inside. Dust motes swirled in the beam. The air smelled musty, stale, but beneath that was something else, something metallic, like rust or blood. He stepped inside. The floorboards groaned under his weight. The hallway stretched ahead, narrow and crooked, with doors branching off on either side. Wallpaper peeled in long strips, and the once white trim was stained yellow with age. His light flickered, just once, but long enough to make his heart lurch. He tightened his grip on the phone and whispered to himself, "Just a house. That's all it is." But then he heard it, a soft shuffle from upstairs. Sam froze, straining to listen. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the house settling. It was footsteps, slow, deliberate, dragging across the floor above. He told himself to leave, to turn around, walk back to the car, and forget any of this ever happened. But curiosity, or maybe stubbornness, pushed him deeper inside. He moved toward the staircase at the end of the hall. The steps groaned as he climbed, his light trembling with the shaking of his hand. The upstairs hallway was even darker, lined with closed doors. That smell was stronger here, metallic and sour. Sam wrinkled his nose and tried to breathe shallow. One door stood slightly open. From behind it came the faintest sound, a whisper. Too soft to make out, but unmistakable. He reached out with a shaking hand and pushed the door. It swung open to reveal what looked like a child's bedroom. The wallpaper was faded, covered with patterns of balloons and clowns, peeling in long curls. A tiny bed frame leaned against the far wall, and on it sat a doll. Its porcelain face was cracked, one glass eye missing. The other stared straight at him. Sam exhaled sharply, nearly laughing in relief. It was just a doll, just junk left behind. He stepped closer, lowering the light. That was when the doll's mouth opened. Not wide, just a small parting of the lips. Enough for a voice to slip out. A whisper. Clear this time. Get out. Sam stumbled back, his phone shaking so hard the light darted across the room. He tripped over the threshold and slammed into the hallway wall. His chest heaved as he scrambled to his feet. The footsteps returned, heavy now, directly above him. But he was upstairs. He turned his light toward the ceiling. Dust rained down as something moved in the crawlspace above, pacing, following him. Sam ran. He bolted down the hall, toward the stairs. But the hallway felt longer than before, stretching endlessly, doors multiplying along the walls. Every one of them rattled as he passed, handles twisting, something trying to get out. He hit the stairs and flew down them, his footsteps echoing like thunder. He reached the bottom and sprinted toward the door, only to find it closed. Slammed shut. He hadn't closed it. He knew he hadn't. His hands fumbled at the knob. It wouldn't turn. He yanked, shoved, but it was locked from the outside. The whispers rose behind him, layered now. Dozens of voices spilling from the hallway, from the walls, from the very air. His light flickered violently, strobing the room. And in one of those flashes, he saw them. Figures standing in the hall. Dozens of them, their faces blurred, features melted, all watching him. The light died. Darkness swallowed him. The next morning, his car was found on the roadside, door open, key still in the ignition. The house was searched, but there was no trace of Sam. Only one thing was new. The doll in the upstairs bedroom now had two eyes. Every town has its traditions, but in the small farming community of Cold Creek, the harvest season carried a superstition older than the town itself. People whispered that once every generation, under the glow of the blood-red harvest moon, something came out of the fields to collect its due. Most treated it as folklore, an old story to scare kids into coming home before dark. But when October came and the nights grew long, the adults locked their doors early. No one lingered outside when the harvest moon rose. Emily didn't believe in any of it. She was 22, fresh out of college, and back in town visiting her parents. She remembered her grandmother telling her those stories when she was little, her wrinkled hands gripping Emily's as she warned, "If you hear the horn during harvest moon, don't look, don't follow. Stay inside no matter what." That night, Emily sat on the porch of her family's farmhouse, sipping cider, scrolling her phone. The moon was massive above the fields, swollen and red, casting the world in an eerie copper glow. The corn swayed like restless bodies under its light. At first, she thought she was imagining it, the low, droning sound that drifted through the night, like a distant horn, long and mournful, vibrating in her chest. Her parents were asleep. The house was dark behind her. She stood, frowning toward the fields. The sound rose again, closer this time, and with it came something else, movement. Shapes shifting between the rows of corn, tall and thin, keeping perfectly in rhythm with the horn. Her heart hammered. Probably deer, she whispered to herself. But she didn't believe it. Then she saw him. At the edge of the field stood a figure, towering, his head crowned with what looked like antlers, twisted and sharp. His body was draped in something that might once have been robes, now tattered and black. The harvest moon glowed against him, and his eyes, two hollow pits, gleamed faintly like embers. He lifted one arm, impossibly long, and pointed at the farmhouse. The horn blared again. Emily stumbled back, slamming into the door. Her hand shook as she tried to open it, but the knob refused to turn. Locked. She hadn't locked it. She knew she hadn't. She pounded on the wood. "Mom, Dad." Her voice cracked. No answer. The windows above were dark, silent. The horn's call deepened, and from the corn came figures. Dozens of them. Men, women, children, faces slack, eyes glazed white. Their movements jerky, unnatural, as though pulled by strings. They trudged out of the rows, forming a circle around the farmhouse. Emily's throat tightened. She backed against the door, trapped, as the figure with antlers stepped forward. His shadow stretched across the yard, long and clawed. The voices started then, whispers rising with the wind, layering over one another. She recognized some of them, neighbors, kids she had gone to school with, people who'd died years ago. Their voices wove into one chilling chant, though she couldn't understand the words. The figure lifted both arms. The horn sounded one final time, and the circle of pale-eyed people turned their heads toward Emily. In perfect unison, she screamed. And then darkness. When she opened her eyes, she was standing in the field. The moon hung low above her, bathing everything in crimson. The farmhouse was gone, the road gone. Only endless rows of corn remained. She stumbled, disoriented, calling out for her parents, for anyone. That was when she heard it. Footsteps behind her. She turned slowly. Her grandmother stood there, eyes white, face blank, and in a voice that was not her own, she whispered, "You're part of the harvest now." The screen of the story fades to black, but some say if you stand outside during the harvest moon and listen closely, you'll hear the horn in the distance, louder each year, closer, waiting for the next harvest. The harvest moon has set, the fields are quiet, but the stories don't end here. Tonight, we walked among watchers, figures, and shadows that should not exist. You've seen the cornfields, the lonely highways, and the houses that hide unspeakable horrors. And some say, when autumn comes again, the jack-o'-lantern man and the harvest moon spirits will return to claim what they are owed. Sleep with the lights on tonight. And remember, the shadows are always closer than you think. But if you dare, come back next time, because the night has many more secrets, and the horrors we haven't told you yet are even closer than you imagine. If you enjoyed these chilling tales, make sure to like, comment your scariest thought, and subscribe so you don't miss the next terrifying story.